My name is David Cadena, and this is the project for the Contact Management System exercise. This exercise consists of two parts, the first in which I'm going to cover in this video. For this exercise, I was asked to create and implement a UML diagram that models a system for managing contacts. The purpose of this model is to utilize composition between classes. Let's look at this UML as an example. Inside of this diagram, we have three classes: address, contact, and name. In the contact class, rather than solely having instance variables as attributes, it has a name instance of the class name and an address instance of the class address. This is composition, where we have classes composed of other classes. A has a relationship, if you will, and this is shown by these arrows, where the contact class has one name instance of the name class and one address instance of the address class. Let me show you how I did this inside of the real program. The instructions said to include three classes. The first two, name and address, consist of a similar structure where both should include three private instance string variables, getters and setters for those variables, and three constructors: a default constructor that initializes the three variables to an empty string, another constructor that has parameters for each variable, and a copy constructor that copies the attributes of the object being passed to the object being created. Both classes should also have a show function that displays the attributes of each class in the output. Now, the third class, the contact class, should model composition by creating instances of the name and address classes, just like you saw in the UML. The contact class should also include a show function that displays the three parameters of both the name and address classes, along with the parameter of the class itself, phone. This is another example of composition, as we're not only outputting the attribute of the contact class, phone, but we are also outputting the attributes of the name and address classes. Let's run the program. It is prompting me to enter a contact, one attribute per line. I'll use the information from the instructions as an example. I'll first enter her name, followed by a new line, her middle name followed by another new line, and her last name followed by yet another new line. Next, I'm going to enter her address information by entering her street address, state, and zip code, all in separate lines. Finally, I'm going to enter her phone number in case you want to call her. Once done, the console outputs the same information but in a contact card format, as you see here, twice. To understand why the data is displayed twice, let me run you through the program. The program begins in main, where an instance of the contact class is created. This calls the default constructor of the class, where, as you can see, the phone attribute is initialized to an empty string. Because the class creates an instance of the name and address classes, their default constructors that initialize their attributes to an empty string are called as well. Therefore, all attributes of the program are initialized to an empty string when we create the contact object. We then read the input from the user, which in this case was what we entered in the console. We do this by overloading and using the extraction operator in the contact class. The extraction operator has this format with the two parameters: the stream from where we will be reading, in this case the console, and the target object where we will be placing that data. In the function implementation, we start by reading from in, the console, and placing that data into each corresponding attribute. How do we do this? We do this by calling the extraction operators for the class's name and address. In the name class, the program reads one line at a time and places whatever it read in that line in the corresponding attribute. For example, the program reads the first line, where I entered Barbara, and stops there. It then places Barbara in the attribute first name. It knows when to stop when reading because of this getLine function, and it does this for all the attributes of the name and address classes. Now back to the contact class, the program reads the last line, where I entered Barbara's phone number so you can call her, and I put it in the phone attribute. Now back to main, we create a second instance, contact2, and pass contact as a parameter. This might seem confusing, like why would you pass an object we already created into a new object that we're just creating? In the contact class, we have a constructor, but not just any kind of constructor, a copy constructor. This constructor receives a former object as a parameter by reference and copies all of its attributes into the new one being created. I am doing this by calling the copy constructor from the name and address classes and passing the name and address objects from the existing contact object as arguments to them. For example, the name copy constructor does this by assigning the getters of each attribute for the passed object, in this case the first contact object we created, to the same attributes of the second object, in this case contact2. Then we simply display the data using the showContact function. All these examples show how we used composition throughout the code. Thank you for watching.